Great, thank you very much. Yeah, a warm welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to all see you here virtually in another virtual series of the Knowledge Innovation Interest Group. As you can see here, the focus is on societal platforms between markets and grand challenges. And it's a great pleasure to have organized this session together with three other great colleagues, Sebastian, who is a PhD at LMU, Madeleine Rauch, who is an assistant professor at Copenhagen Business School, Julia Solinas, who is also assistant professor at LMU, and myself, Georg, I'm also assistant professor at WU Vienna and fellow at JQ Linz. And before we get to the great panelists we have, I just want to briefly give you the rationale of this event. And as so often, the starting point is an empirical one. So empirically, we do, especially in the last years, have seen there are more kinds of platforms that one can call societal platforms. So in a sense, platforms that rely on a social mission to generate a societal impact. Right. So examples here include the AK Step, that's about learning opportunities and free education. Other examples about platforms that provide open source blueprints where others can freely then create healthcare products. So the interesting notion that underpins all these phenomena is that we have a multi-sided platform that enables different actors, also geographically distant one, to create value both for the market and for society more broadly. It's a highly interesting phenomena that also comes with perhaps new challenges and something that should be examined by further research. And that's the reason we have this panel to have some great scholars that have thought here and also conducted research that they share with us, especially looking at what is the strategic design of these platforms and also what are particular governance challenges involved in that. With that, I want to hand over to Madeleine.
Thank you so much, Georg. Maybe you can also go to the next slide to kind of see well, our panel is perfect. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to our distinguished panel discussing platforms and grand challenges. We are very delighted to have you here today joining us from across the globe. For some of you, it's morning, afternoon, and evening. So it's great to be here. I think one of the few advantages of actually being on Zoom. And in fact, speaking about our panelists, we could probably fill the next 85 minutes speaking about the impressive accomplishments of those, in particular their work on platforms and grand challenges. Yet in the interest of time and our eagerness to actually hear a debate and kind of the thoughts of our panelists and having a conversation with the larger audience and kind of the questions you submitted, my apologies for just a very brief introductions of the panels. Starting with Professor Shaz Ansari, he's a professor of strategy and innovation at Judge Business School at University of Cambridge, followed by Professor Carlis Baldwin, who is the William L. White Professor of Business Administration at Harvard Business School, followed by Assistant Professor of Strategy and Entrepreneurship, Annie Doshi from UCL. And we also have Dror Etzion, who is an Associate Professor of Strategy and Organization at McGill University. And last but not least, Gurnetta Vasudeva, who is an Associate Professor of Strategic Management and Entrepreneurship at the University of Minnesota. We're very delighted to have each and all of you here today and contributing to this discussion and sharing your thoughts on grand challenges and platforms and offering your unique viewpoints on the topic and allowing us to benefit from the expertise in different fields with different theoretical backgrounds and also different methodological points of departure, which I think will make this panel discussion even more interesting. And if you could go to the next slide, just to kind of show you how we envisioned this 90 minutes panel discussion, and very much designed as an interactive conversation between the panelists and the audience. And to kick us off, we like to have a debate on two questions. And one question is, what are the societal platforms' key design features that enable the orchestration and the social missions achievement? And the second question that we like to pose, how do platforms create and capture value to satisfy multiple goals, actors, expectations, and generate positive societal spillovers? So feel free during the debate that we will have in a second, and we will start in a second, to actually use the chat very actively to make the most of this, unfortunately not in-person setting, but actually on Zoom. I like to remind the speakers again, you have 10 minutes to kind of bring your points across, and the way we envision it, we will have 3 speakers speaking on one question, and actually Gunita speaking on both questions, and then 2 speakers for actually the last question, and I will give some pointers to them. We will start off now with Anil, who will speak on the first question, and he will in particular focus on the platform's dark side and the aka false information. And we're very excited to actually learn what he has been working on. So Anil, feel free to share your screen. You need to unmute.
Hi, can everyone hear me? I'm unmuted. Okay, great.
Yes.
So first and foremost, thank you very much to Julia, Georg, Madeline, and Sebastian for putting on this session. The timing, honestly, for my own complete selfish sake, couldn't have been better. As I'm working on research that is I'm excited to get feedback on what I'm thinking about and what I'm working on. Just so you know a little bit about kind of the agenda, I'm largely thinking about a lot, how false information in the digital environment permeates through platforms, and kind of like strategies or governance mechanisms to alleviate the proliferation of false information on digital platforms. So, and by the way, this work that I'm presenting is joint work with Bill Schmidt, who's at Cornell. So we think of a social media platform as a canonical digital platform where there's flows and exchanges of information and content from one person to another. And a lot of the academic literature and the policy interventions that are proposed these days relate to kind of, can we target this bad actor on the platform? Or can we identify this content flow as being malicious in some way, and try to address that in either the supply side or on the demand side? But by and large, the interventions are talked about on a platform. What I propose today is that if we just kind of expand how we think where digital platforms operate, which is in the broader digital context, we can start thinking about other aspects of proliferation onto a platform. Specifically, there's a lot of content coming from domains, like content domains or news domains, that penetrate into the platform from the outside. Some of those domains are going to be purveyors of false information. And so the question that my co-author and I ask is, can we imagine the platform opening up its boundaries and incorporating some kind of external monitoring mechanism to block the gate, essentially, to prevent the content from entering onto the platform before it penetrates and proliferates on the social media platform? And so we think of this as kind of like stage 2 of monitoring, where stage 1, the platform can observe what's going on within it, but we can't as outside observers. But in this case, it's possible for an external monitoring mechanism to be observable by outsiders, because you and I and everyone can see the data that's accessible that I'll talk about in a minute. So the 3 questions we're going to ask are, number 1, how can we use external monitoring in a way that would act as an early warning system for these outside intruders, for these domain contents that we don't want to penetrate in the platform? Number 2, we're going to say, how might platforms who have different governance strategies or different governance schema use this kind of monitoring effort in order to optimize its own values and its own kind of governance function, if you will? And then third, we ask, once the bad guys find out that they're being monitored, are they going to change their behavior in a way so that they can't be caught anymore? And so those are kind of the 3 questions I'm gonna hit on a very high level, obviously, in the short time. that we have here. So in the first stage, what we do is we ourselves build a prediction model using machine learning. All the kind of the bells and whistles of that model are here. I'm gonna skip that for the sake of brevity. But the idea here is we have data on about 4,000 domains, approximately 8% of which are known purveyors of false information. And the question we ask is, using seemingly innocuous data from the domain registration, can we build some facility in predicting which of these domains at the time it registers can we predict are going to be purveyors, eventual purveyors of false information? Okay, so we build this machine learning model using a method, an algorithm called ElasticNet, and we come up with the following results. Now, if you're not familiar with machine learning results, let me just briefly outline what these two pictures show for you and why we were extremely surprised and impressed by the nature of these results. So both curves essentially show the trade-offs that occur in assessing whether or not some prediction, which comes out as a predictive probability from the model, should be designated as a predicted false domain or a predicted not false domain, right? So imagine there's a domain that has a probability of 0.6. You could set your cutoff at 0.5, in which case you would predict it as being false domain, or you could set your threshold as being 0.9, in which case you would say, no, we won't conclude that this is a false domain. And so these two graphs show the trade-off of moving the threshold from 0 to 100. And in the first graph, we have a metric in both of these instances called area under the curve. And we can compare the first graph's area under the curve to a value of 0.5. And so in our case, the ROC curve on the left-hand side has an area under the curve of 0.922, which generally outperforms what we would call a random classifier at 0.5. And on the right-hand side, the area under the curve of this curve called the precision recall is 0.52, which can be compared to the prevalence of false information domains in our data, which as I said earlier, was about 8%. So in both cases, using both of these measures, or both of these kind of depictions of the model, we find that we can get very good traction on predicting whether or not a domain is going to be producing false information just by using seemingly innocuous registration data. So if you want a domain, you have to register with ICANN, and you're going to put your name, your contact information, your email, and things like that. And from data like that, and kind of who you're registering with and what kind of domain you have, we are able to delineate it with pretty good fidelity whether or not you're a false information provider or not. Okay, great, that's the model. How might different platforms use this? So we're talking about governance and thinking about governance in a broader context rather than just within the platform itself. In order to get some traction on this question, we essentially created three hypothetical platforms: a platform with strict governance, a platform with moderate governance, and a platform with lax governance. And we handed all the probabilities from the predicted domains to each of these hypothetical platforms. And what we found in our simulations was that if you have strict governance, that means you're going to want to really catch the bad guys. You're going to really want to identify them. And so you're going to set a threshold that's fairly low, 0.10 in our demonstrative example, sorry. And what you see with a 0.10 is you're going to capture a lot of the bad guys, in fact, but you're going to make a lot of mistakes as well. If you have a very lax governance strategy, if you don't care about false information, or your profits are around optimizing eyeballs and you don't care about identifying false information, certain very large social networks are in the news right now for having that kind of governance scheme. You can imagine who I'm talking about, depending on before or after the name change. But a platform with lax governance would have a very strict criteria, a very high criteria. I shouldn't say strict, a very high criteria on whether or not the domain is going to be false or not. So they won't catch very many false domains. 2 minutes. Thank you, no problem. They won't catch very many false domains, but they won't be making a lot of mistakes on the flip side. And you can see the trade-offs between the two, and obviously the moderate platform would be in between those two extreme examples. And then finally, third, we asked a simple question. Once the bad guys know they're going to be monitored, can they just simply change their behavior? And so our machine learning model would stop being effective. To get some traction on this question, we devised a signaling model, dynamic Bayesian game, where we have a registrant who can either be a high type, producing a general domain, or a low type, producing false information, and the registrant who is going to be monitoring and imposing some monitoring cost. Without getting into all the details of the model itself, we conclude that in all of our equilibria outcomes, we have a situation where the high type, the good guy, is no worse off, but the low type, the purveyor of false information, is unambiguously worse off. And so we have this model where we essentially do a judo strategy on the bad guys, where they want to stay hidden, but their desire to stay hidden is what reveals them to the machine learning model, which wouldn't be evident to you and me. And so we have this situation where we can come up with strategies on how to further separate the good domains from the bad domains using our signaling model. So where can we go from here? In our paper that I'm presenting today, we talked about this being a monitor from the platform's point of view, but that need not be the case. This could be a general monitor who essentially services all the social media platforms. And that general monitor might have some benefits of standardization. They might also be able to impose new rules and regulations and subsequent policies. We're also considering heterogeneity in the types of false news purveyors. Some are maybe worse than others. So what traction can we get on that front? And finally, we're thinking about the competitive environment, because it's not just domains and platforms. We also have, credible news providers. So how might the dynamic between false information and credible information in a digital environment be leveraged in a way to further isolate the false information providers?
Thank you so much, Anil, for sharing. So to the audience, feel free to use at this point the chat to share your reflections, thoughts, or questions, and we later on will pick them up again. And I would like to now give the word to Shaz, who is going to speak about the group of academics creating a medical platform and how a platform of news can actually be really nicely tied to the presentation of Anil. So feel free to share your screen, because I think you have some slides prepared for us.
Mute myself. All right. Okay, great. So let me just share my slides. Can you slides? Yes? No, not yet.
Not yet. We see your desktop.
Okay. Yes. Do you see them now? Yeah. Okay, great. Yes.
Now, perfect.
Thank you. Okay, great. So this is a paper that is joint work with Madan and Rao, who's a co-organizer here at Copenhagen Business School. This is forthcoming in Journal of Management Studies, and I thought I'd just mention this because it's relevant to the questions posed. And again, first of all, thank you for inviting me here in the first place. But I'll just mention this, what this is about, and then I'll move on to something that connects really well with what Anil has been talking about. So I thought that really follows up very nicely with Anil's excellent presentation. So this paper is forthcoming in Journal of Management Studies on a social platform, if we can call it that. And the key idea there was that this group of academics in Copenhagen actually were doing research on rare diseases and collecting lots of data on figuring out these, what rare diseases are that have typically been neglected by the pharmaceutical industry. So you can imagine rare diseases have a small market, so they're not very attractive for the commercial market. So they've continued to be neglected by pharma. And these guys were researching on how users come up with solutions to solve their challenges that they face from suffering from such rare diseases. So in doing this research, they came across with serendipitous experiences. They came across meeting people who had come up with immensely inspiring stories and solutions to their rare diseases. These are patients themselves and their caregivers. And they thought, like, this can't stop at just doing research about them. So they actually set up an NGO and created this social platform called Patient Innovation, which basically the idea was to spread these solutions more widely amongst the entire community of people with these conditions. So the idea was that these solutions should not stay limited to the people who were devising them, but rather be shared more widely. There were absolutely amazing solutions that have come up with, these users have come up with. I mean, a few examples was this person from, Amit Goffer from Israel, who was a tetraplegic. He came up with this wheelchair that, why do you always have to sit in a wheelchair? So why can't you walk around in the wheelchair? So the idea was, well, he came up with a solution, but how could others also benefit from these very affordable, very simple solutions that could make life better for these people? There are plenty of quotes around this. So, for example, there was stories from, Tal Goldsworthy, who was a trained engineer, and he wanted to find a solution because of what he said, this is not just a plumbing problem. He suffered from this syndrome, and he said, well, look, this is really the Marfan syndrome. It's simply beyond impressive. So when they were sort of researching this, they said these people were simply coming up with amazing stories, and these interviewers got completely inspired that they said, we need to do something more than simply conduct research about them. So when they were sort of moments, there's an interview 11 quote, moments you engage with them, one is just blown away by the sheer enormity of their individual ideas. It was astonishing to see how complete strangers, very accomplished people, wanted to contribute to emphasize project. And then they met these people such as Richard Roberts, and this guy who's an academic didn't even know when he came across Richard Roberts that he was a Nobel Prize winner. And he said, I wanted to be of help. And he said, well, who are you? And the guy said, I'm a Nobel Prize winner for medicine. So it was quite a surprise for him to figure out that this guy was not just who he was, but also willing to help out in pushing this project, promoting this project, giving it his time. Actually, he was happy to visit him in Portugal and do whatever he could to help this progress. There are lots of other solutions that came up with this people that have suffered with this cerebral palsy, and simple solutions that enable them to walk with more convenience. There were all kinds of robotic hands, very, very cheaply priced, that this could be shared more widely. And there was, as Anil was talking about, a pretty solid governance mechanism to vet these solutions, to make sure that they work, to make sure that they met the criteria. And then they set up this thing called patient innovation to figure out, well, how to spread them, but also spread them in a morally responsible manner. Now, we devised several mechanisms on how this happened. And one of the things that we figured out from a sort of address from a theoretical standpoint is, how do organizations get repurposed? So in this case, it was just a project that got repurposed from being an academic research project, so where the whole idea was to publish in top-tier journals, to something that is an NGO for disseminating social good in that sense. So, and we figured out how that happened was because these guys felt the moral emotions about right and wrong was much more important, that drove them to shift their core logic, if you like, from research to serving a social purpose. So basically the idea is, and how did this sort of harness this power of what people have talked about, user innovation, a long time. And of course, Eric von Hippel, who's on the board of this, has written a lot about user innovation. But how could you harness this power from these extremely driven users for responsible innovation that could then be shared more widely for the greater good, if you like, and benefit of the community? So this presentation, this paper is about how organizations get repurposed, and we talk about the mechanisms that may allow such repurposing to happen. So you could think about how, business organizations might develop innovations that are more responsible than simply being, financially beneficial. Related to that, and comes to following Anil's presentation, there's my PhD student at Cambridge and IFM, Stephen Lyle, who's actually a media technologist. So he's actually worked in Hollywood and is Emmy award-winning producer, and now he's doing a PhD at Cambridge in the engineering department. And this guy is actually really doing an interesting project about the disruption of broadcast news. And the main idea there was that CNN was the last disruptor in broadcast news, and hardly anyone relies on broadcast news now. And if you think about after 1984, there's been no major disruption. Yes, we rely more on social media, as Anil was talking about, but there has been more and more streaming. But again, news itself has not been disrupted. So the interesting thing is, you see the streaming is becoming more popular than ever. about 1 in 5 adults in the US say they get their political news primarily through social media, 18%. It's a figure is around close to 20%. And as Anil was talking about, there's this fake news pandemic and all these issues that have come around this problem, if you like, and how we consume news, how we...
You have 2 minutes.
Okay, I'll just close the next 2 slides. So there's a sentiment regarding reliable pandemic news, and if 74% are worried that fake news is being spread about the virus, 45% have difficulty finding trustworthy information, 85% desire to hear from more from scientists and less from politicians. So the interesting thing about this is that there's an extreme level of distrust with growing level of distrust, I would say, with social media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, LinkedIn, or whatever channels of social media you use. So given this, the idea is to create this a different kind of platform. And I think this is where Anil's ideas about how to govern this are very relevant. This proof of concept was developed by Fraunhofer Institute and Cambridge University together for it's still a hypothetical streaming news platform. And the idea for this academic collaboration is to create a syndicated network of universities to provide local, national, and international broadcast journalism that is OTT streaming. So the idea of this is basically a user-generated news platform. Of course, I could talk more about how this news would be curated, how would the governance happen, how would you ensure the right audiences are reached, et cetera, et cetera. So those issues, I don't want to go into the exact detail, but the idea at the very core is a user-generated news platform, and that's what the whole notion of IBIT is about. And I think this connects well with Anil's points earlier about the problem that has been addressing. And there's one way that we think this is a practical solution to disrupting the broadcast news that simply the people don't read. Young generation don't even watch TV, let alone broadcast news. So we are figuring out this could be one way of addressing this problem through such a platform. So I'll stop here. Thanks a lot again for your patience, for hearing these 2 projects, and we'll be happy to address any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much for presenting, Shaz. I think it actually fits quite nicely to the first presentation. I think a lot of food for thought and good discussions. So let's now transition to Gunetta. And Gunetta has been so nice to actually speak to both of the questions that we posed. So her presentation will actually speak a little bit to the key organization design features, but also how platforms can create and capture value. So thank you so much for being here. And I can already see her slides. Perfect.
Great. So thank you, Madeline, and thank you to all the organizers for including me today. So I don't have a paper on the first question, but I wanted to share some thoughts on actually the flip of the question that was posed, which is, what are some of the governance features that can enable social value creation in platforms? And so the flip of that question is, what are some of the platform governance characteristics which might actually subvert social welfare? And some of these ideas and themes actually emerged from a special issue on platform ecosystems, which we did not so long ago, and Shaz and some others who are on this call perhaps have papers in it or have seen it. And in that special issue, we in the introduction, we conceptualized platforms as meta-organizational ecosystems, and we outlined some of the governance features which enable platforms to create and appropriate value across different types of competition, be it within platform competition or cross-platform competition or competition with incumbents. So as a result of that exercise, what emerged was that the very same governance features which actually enable the sort of economic value creation and strategic advantage for platforms also can lead to this erosion of social value creation and actually can subvert social welfare. And so here, I've outlined a few of those characteristics, such as winner-take-all contests, which can incentivize the misuse of data or behavioral information, the lack of direct authority, which is something that platforms try to overcome through architectural design or through algorithms, which can lead to manipulation and deception. The gatekeeping or structural positions that platform owners or platform coordinators often hold, which can lead to bottlenecks and the need for moderation and checks and balances. And the tangled web of interactions, which can lead to both direct and indirect harm to users. And finally, apart from the internal governance, the external institutional factors can also determine the degree of enforcement in terms of policies and the regulatory conditions. And as a result of all of these factors, we're seeing platforms come into the news, actually get a lot of negative media in terms of their costs to social welfare. And we kind of see this paradox of high market value of platforms and also the high costs that some of these platforms are imposing in terms of social value creation. So kind of bringing together what Shaz and Anil said, I think what this does is it raises challenges in terms of, we all love platforms. I think we all love to interact on Facebook or transact through Amazon. So the challenge here is managing the trade-offs in terms of reducing the costs, but at the same time, retaining the economic efficiency, the economic value, and also enhancing the quality and social value creation possibilities from these platforms. So I think this is really, a challenge, and it opens up a lot of interesting avenues for future research. In terms of how platforms create and capture value to satisfy multiple goals and actors and expectations, here actually I do have a paper which I want to share, some of the preliminary findings from. So here what we are doing is we're thinking about the data and the data privacy and security aspects as an important societal challenge that is confronting platforms and a variety of other stakeholders. So we know that there's a large growth in the big data that platforms are able to generate and hold control over. So there is a burgeoning of that data, and the market actors actually do reward platforms for the value that this big data is able to create, as we can see from the market valuation of companies recently, and some of the big platforms have received the highest market valuation. At the same time, what we're seeing is societal actors, governments go after platforms, as we've seen most recently in the case of China, where the government blocked the Ant IPO and has since also been, inserting itself more directly in the governance of platforms, largely because of the vast amounts of data that these platforms are able to control and manipulate. So just as an example of this data flywheel effect, and financials, data scientists were able to see that women who bought skinny jeans were also more likely to pay for phone screen repairs. And so they speculated that these handsets were probably slipping out of those trousers pockets, and they were able to sell or direct screen insurance to skinny jeans wearing women. So this is just an example of how companies can use data to sell more products and do more, direct targeting of consumers. So in this joint work with Farzan Borumand, who's a PhD student at Minnesota, and Aya Lipponen at Cornell, we're asking this question in terms of, does attention to data privacy and security enable competitive differentiation? So given that we're seeing a lot of regulation, not just in China, but also in the context of the European Union with the General Data Protection Regulation in force, how is this impacting the ability of firms to create and appropriate value? And I think this is an important question because it affects not just firms that are doing business in Europe, but also firms that are doing business in the US. And there are some very stark differences in the institutional context and the foundational principles which are guiding these regulations, and that can have an impact on U.S. firms as U.S. firms get more likely to get caught in the crosshairs as they transition from this institutional context of permissionless innovation to the GDPR type context of privacy as a human right. So what we're seeing is that there is certainly an increase in attention to data privacy and security among large platforms like Amazon and Facebook. And this is again based on an analysis of the 10K reports of these companies over time. And we use topic modeling and other machine learning approaches to be able to get this kind of data. So again, we see that there is a significant change in the attention to data privacy for firms that have operations in the European Union and those that don't have operations in the European Union, as shown by the red line. They also are showing, are responding to this increased regulatory intervention. Again, empirically, we find very similar positive effects, both for firms that are directly involved in Europe, as well as for firms that have involvement or have indirect exposure to GDPR through their peers who are doing business in Europe. So the bigger question becomes, how is this greater attention to data privacy and security, which is likely to be associated with costs, both in terms of updating hardware and software infrastructure and changing some of the architectural and governance controls within the company. How is this leading to value creation, or how is this affecting the profitability? And what we're finding is that the more firms are attending to data privacy and data security in their 10K reports, the less value they are creating, as evidenced from Tobin's Q. So this is showing us a negative effect. And of course, this is being moderated by the extent that firms may already have strong machine learning capabilities. So, lower reliance on data or the lowered ability to collect data is less problematic for firms that have already built innovation capabilities based on machine learning and so on. So these are, again, very preliminary results, and we're also trying to figure out if if firms that are in more lax regulatory regimes may be able to overcome these regulatory sanctions more easily. In another study that has already been around.
You have 1 minute left.
Sure. So this is my last slide. So I just wanted to kind of, summarize by saying that data is a valuable resource. It's the new oil in the data and information age. And I think platforms are able to benefit from it. They are able to create a lot of market value from it. But there is also this paradox of how this access to data and control over data can create, social, can detract from social value. And naturally, we're seeing regulators and also, I think, activists and other social groups, as we see in this particular study on digital failures, a study on data breaches, we find that firms do incur costs in terms of top management turnover and making organizational changes in terms of, getting more focus within the organization, less diversification. And all of those changes don't always lead to better outcomes, because it's almost like an arms race when it comes to digital failures or data protection and data security types of issues. So I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you so much for presenting and sharing your thoughts and kind of the underpinnings of that. And I think you already touched upon fantastic points for discussion, ranging from data breaches to the new oil. And I think this is good food for thought and also for discussion later on. Let's invite Dror to share his thoughts on the question and learn a little bit what he has been thinking about. So feel free to share your screen, Dror.
I will in a moment. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to share, it's interesting that Granita just mentioned oil. So my platform is in the topic of climate change. I'd like to share some background information about a platform that we're actually running as part of a research project out of McGill University. It's a project oriented towards small and medium enterprises taking climate action. So actually, as part of this project, we've become owners and operators of a platform, and we're learning and testing all kinds of things as we do that. So I'll actually send you the link to the platform itself, so if you get bored listening to me or looking at my slides, you can actually go and browse and see what it's about. I'll present a quick overview of what the platform is and what it does, but then I'll basically try to reflect on 3 ways that we think or we hope that we can create value, not so much capture value, but how perhaps we can create value through these types of platforms. So with any luck, my screen share will work. Madeline, can I get a brief nod of your head? Super,
Perfect.
Thank you. All right, so the platform is called Pivot. This is our tagline. Obviously, we're working with marketing professionals. This is a collaboration with the National Film Board of Canada, and so everything that you see during this presentation that's beautiful or visually aesthetically pleasing is definitely not my work, it's the work of our partners. So what is it really? This is the kind of the slide that we use to explain our work to non-academic audiences. It's a platform that is Canada-wide and is focusing on small business owners, so small and medium enterprises. And really, it's a collaboration with the National Film Board of Canada, which is a quasi-governmental organization that tells the story, deeper and more profound stories than the typical news cycle about what's happening in Canada, how Canadians are dealing with all kinds of issues. And it's a storytelling entity. It used to do primarily film, and now it's very active in the digital interactive space. And so our collaboration with the digital interactive studio. And what we're doing in this project, which we call an action research project, is to attempt to convey climate action stories from small and medium enterprises through social networks, through our own platform and, of course, the social platforms that are more familiar. And the idea is really to create some kind of snowball or amplification effect. Because there are, of course, some small and medium enterprises that are taking action, and we think that those stories deserve to be told, and by being told, perhaps they will be taken up and pursued by others. So today, I think many of us know, is the second day, I guess, of the main event at COP26 in Glasgow. We probably are aware that heads of government and CEOs of large corporations and all kinds of wealthy people are there trying to debate the future of humanity. What I think is also accurate is that small and medium enterprises are not part of that conversation. And in Canada, but I think pretty much the statistics are equal throughout the world. It's actually the largest sector in the private force in terms of labor. You know, mom and pop stores, actually the backbone of a lot of economies, especially in rural areas, towns, but also in cities. But because they're numerous, dispersed, and diverse, they're often overlooked in terms of solutions towards climate action issues. And they're really kind of at on the sidelines of many of these initiatives and regulations. What I think is particularly appealing in the context of social platforms is that there's I think quite a blurry line between the SME as the owner, founder, manager of a business, and the person as a person with their own values and sets of ideals and things that they do in their personal lives. And so that kind of is where we like to play in that boundary area between what they are as a leader of a small organization and what they are as humans. So that's our context for our project, Canada-wide, SMEs, climate action. And so 3 reflections on how perhaps this platform or platforms of this type can create, and again, less capture, but create value. So the first is actually social contagion. I think that's kind of the underlying premise, the kind of the axiom perhaps that's underlying the work that we're doing, is that if you see other people or you are constantly receiving information about other people behaving in certain ways, that ultimately is a very human thing to follow in the footsteps. And so there are many, many examples of this, not of course just online, offline as well. And this is one that kind of I stumbled upon recently, which I liked a lot. So the number one predictor, essentially, if you're going to have a solar panel on your house, is whether your neighbors have solar panels on their houses as well. So we take these cues, I think in many cases subconsciously, we see what others are doing, and we basically, if it reaches especially a certain type of critical mass, then we often unthinkingly assume that that is the right thing to do, and then we follow suit in pretty much the same way. So that's kind of the idea of the platform itself. And I think, you know, if you look at all kinds of TikTok challenges and all kinds of things that you see online, clearly those things happen, sometimes in a more faddish way, but sometimes in more fundamental and deep ways. For example, our thoughts on what beauty looks like, I think, are highly influenced by things that we see on social media. And those are deeper and substantive changes. Second thing that I think we can do with our platform is to quantify the potency of different narratives for taking climate action. So hopefully a few of you have been able to mosey over to the website and see what it looks like. You probably saw a sequence of stories, like on the left image here. You can see stories of 3 entrepreneurs that we've highlighted in Canada, Thompson Tran, Naomi, and somebody whose name I can't remember. But when you actually see the website, each of you who have gone and visited the website just now might have seen a different story of an entrepreneur. So you might have all gone to the story for Naomi, but you've actually seen one of the 3 versions of the story that we created. And so Naomi, so this is typical, A/B testing like that any platform does. We've created 3 different stories for Naomi, and each of them, as you can see here, if your eyesight is good enough, kind of highlights a certain different rationale for why Naomi might be doing something. Okay, and we have 3 primary rationales that we studied. One is extrinsic motivations. You care about the environment, you care about your community, you care about future generations. Hypothesis 2 is that you have a lot of passion and personal aspiration in terms of doing good things, in terms of surmounting challenges, doing business in your own unique way, being kind of unique in the way that you pursue your strategy. And the third one is that you think you can make money out of this because your consumers value it, or you could save money, or so on and so forth. So for each of the entrepreneurs currently on the website, there are 3 versions of why they might be doing what they're doing. And people are exposed to different ones according to our algorithms behind the scenes. And what we've discovered, if you could see, this is our preliminary results, what we see so far is that actually the one that is least persuasive in terms of getting people to click through or to engage or to see a video to its end. These are all 4 different measures of the interest that people have in a certain story. The least compelling is actually the business case. So H3, you can do, if you do this, you can make more money, or you could save money, or you could do something around being more profitable, is actually the one that creates the least excitement in terms of online clicks or engagement. And so that's, I think, interesting in and of itself. Maybe kind of the go-to rationale for why we would want to pursue these types of things is actually wrong. And then the third thing that you can actually do is to uncover something that's called second-order normative beliefs. I don't know if that's a familiar concept. So just to explain what we're trying to do here, we talk to our entrepreneurs, and we try to get a sense of what they are and where they're coming from, what their desires are when they're doing these types of climate actions. So for example, this is Paul. This is a pseudonym, but let's say he has a deep desire to save the world for his daughter, okay, save the planet. He's doing it for next generations. And then we ask Paul, hey, Paul, how would you like to tell your story on the Pivot website? And so Paul would typically not say, yeah, I want to tell everybody that I'm doing it for my kid. Paul would typically like to say, well, I'm doing it because this is a good way to make money or to save money. And what Paul seems to be doing is assuming that his motivation will not resonate for his peers. In other words, he believes that other SMEs have different motivations from his own. So you see, I think about the world this way, but I'm pretty sure everybody else thinks about the world in a different way. And this is called a second-order normative belief. So this is something that's prevalent in all kinds of social contexts where private information is different from public information, or perceived private information is different from perceived public information. And what we're trying to uncover with our study is to discover how prevalent it is, and then understand why this is happening. If we can get some insight into that, then I think The implications are actually quite significant, because what this would mean is that we have to really understand, are we telling the right stories? Are people expressing themselves in a way that really resonates with the way that other people are thinking about it? Because we might be using the wrong story, we might be using the wrong motivation when we try of taking climate action. And I think that was not a hint, but nonetheless, that is where my presentation ends. So I want to thank you. And again, if you want to learn more about the project, this is the way to contact me.
Thank you so much, Dor, for sharing. I think it's wonderful, like apart from this academic interest that we usually have, that actually having you here in the discussion as an actual platform owner, I think you can bring also unique insight into that we wouldn't have otherwise have as academics. So thank you for that as well. Let's move to the last panelist, which will be Carlos, and she will speak on despite good intention when complementary platforms collide. Feel free to share your screen. Perfect.
Is it up, I hope?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank the organizers so much for inviting me to this panel. I do not have a paper, nor do I own a platform. You know, the preceding presentations have all been fascinating. I will try to be very quick here. So other than my slides won't move. Oh, okay, my plan. I want to discuss a complex case of platforms inadvertently on a collision course. And being played out, I guess this is day 2, behind the scenes at the COP26. And the outcome as of right now is unknown. So let's start with the Paris Agreement, and I'll skip most of this. The framework goes back to 1992. There are these annual conferences that are decision-making bodies. There's a bureaucratic infrastructure, the Secretariat based in Bonn. Was the Kyoto Protocol, where countries for the first time committed to reduce greenhouse gases. And there's now the Paris Agreement, which came into force in 2016. 192 countries have committed to nationally determined contributions. Remember that NDC, including targets for GHG emissions. So once states have set up their NDCs, they're not binding, but they do get updated. There are progress reports, they're subject to technical review, and they get added up in a global stock taking. The details are still being worked out. I want to say that much of what I've learned about this situation is due to my friend Sue Hall, who's in the audience right now, and I just want to give her a shout out. But I've also talked to others, because I'm going to talk about conflict and collision. So the collision involves what counts as an NDC, what counts as a contribution. This is a country's contribution to global emission reduction. The other platform are the voluntary carbon markets in North America. And they're not a single platform, but they do qualify as they're a platform in the Rocher and Tirole sense. They are marketplaces. They were introduced in 2005. The total market size has fluctuated and moved around to different places around the world. These markets are fueled at this point by corporate pledges to become carbon neutral or net zero. So corporations who are unable to reduce their own emissions to zero can purchase verified emission reductions. These emission reductions, this is important, are associated with projects: forest, green buildings, geothermal heating and cooling plants, other capital investments. Capital investments that can demonstrate to a registry that they are honestly reducing GHG emissions. So there are two kinds of registries. This is down in the weeds a little bit. One sets standards for emission measurement, very important to be able to do. And then there are carbon accounting registries, which are more like they're actually not like the New York Stock Exchange. This is a brokerage market. They're like the Depository Trust Corporation and Clearinghouse. They keep track of who owns theirs. Now, EU emission trading works very differently. The participation is not voluntary for the most part, but mandated by cap and trade regulations. These are the big markets which I looked into. There are designated members, power plants, that trade allowances with each other. The supply of allowances offsets is limited by the regulator. And so in the jargon that we're used to, this is a closed platform system. There is not, it's completely limited within itself. Voluntary carbon markets allow anyone to sell credits. So think of eBay or Etsy. You can bring your project in with its claim to reducing emissions, and you can, if you convince a registry and the monitors, then you can sell those allowances on the market. And supply increases as projects are approved. So consider a university like Harvard that wants to build a LEED platform building, a green building. And I'll be really quick here, but it's important to see they have to go through an established protocol with a third-party verifier. They estimate the reductions. A registry certifies the feasibility of the plan. The credits cannot themselves be bought or sold until the emission reductions occur and are verified, so they come through time. However, the sponsor can anticipate a stream of cash payments from the purchaser of offsets over the life of the project. And channeling my inner finance professor, which I was for most of my career, these anticipated cash flows can reduce the costs of the building, or you can pledge them and secure financing, secure some amount of financing for your project. So that may be the difference between go and no go on the project. So you're increasing possibly the supply of projects. So how big is this market? Estimated to be about $1 billion this year, but it was only 146 million in 2017. So it's very volatile. But remember that each offset traded this year is part of a stream that may be 20, 21 years long. So there's the unit is really the project, and there are multiple years associated with each project. So in summary, the voluntary carbon markets can monetize emission reduction and encourage these investments outside the traditional regulated sectors. But, so the big but, the quality of certification is still uncertain. And recently, the vast majority of offsets are coming from Asia, and this is a very new development. So that the markets are in flux, and it's not at all clear that the certification is uniform across nations. So the debate is whether the voluntary markets accelerate emissions reductions or simply enable a new type of scam. And I've heard passionate arguments on both sides from good friends, not with each other because I didn't put them in the same place, but the polarity between this is the only way to achieve the Paris Agreement goals to this is just a scam of corporations trying to get PR. by being climate neutral. Those sides are both very vocal. So, and I said I would stay neutral. So here's the unknown corner, which the organizers asked us to look at. The Conference of Parties, or which is supported by this UNFCCC Secretariat, may have the power to shut the voluntary markets down. It's a very complex accounting question. You know, I had to go back to my early days in accounting and teaching accounting. The question is, how should an emission reduction sold to a foreign buyer be counted relative to the home country's national defined contribution? Your eyes are glazing over. So do mine. It's a very, very arcane and regulation that has not really been approved yet. So we'll skip the next two slides, which are explain the status quo and the shutdown regulation in the gory detail you need. The basic line is status quo is this is an unregulated market, and the right of the project sponsors to sell their carbon offsets created in for these markets any place they want has not been challenged under the Paris Agreement. The proposal is to basically take any sold credits away from the nation away from the home nation. So that they would be penalized for credits that, quote, flow out of the country, except the credits do not flow to another country, they flow to a private sector actor. And the other country, with a multinational buyer, there is no other country, and even with another domestic buyer, the nation state in which that buyer is domiciled wouldn't know of these credits. So they just disappear. Lessons, I think, about societal platforms. There are conflicting domains. The UN versus countries versus private actor. There are conflicting logics, in this case, open and closed systems. Conflicting optics, the official emissions measures versus what actually happens. Trust and distrust of markets. Trust and distrust of certifiers, trust and distrust of corporations, and the very goal of climate neutrality. And it's still to be determined what will happen in these markets. So please stay tuned, and thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Carlos. I think this was a great example of even real life theorizing, so to speak, speaking on the current happenings, what is happening in Glasgow, and actually the implications also for us. So please join me in a round of applause for our 5 wonderful panelists. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. It was most inspiring and a great food for thought beyond, much beyond the 90 minutes that we actually have together here. I would like to pass the word on to my colleague Julia, who's going to kick off our discussion, and very much taking now the input that we got from the very nice and excellent 5 panel discussions or contributions to having a conversation on the topic, or maybe potentially even beyond the topic. So thank you so much for being here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much to all the panelists, also from my side. It has been a so inspiring 1-hour presentation that I really there are really so many notes that I took. Let me open this discussion, and I want to basically break the ice, hoping that actually all of you attending this session can then voice their question. You can do that by posting your question again in the chat, or just by raising the hand, and then basically we'll come back to you. Because really our goal is try to have a debate also on this occasion. Okay, let's break the ice then. and that's somehow a question that comes from those who the participants submitted through the registration procedure, and it's about design. Design actually is a topic that comes through so many presentations of the five of you. And what is very interesting is like the duality that you panelists have introduced in the design of these platforms. Some of you mentioned we need a third party that needs to monitor. We need somehow to have a general monitor system for this platform. But other presentation instead suggest, no, we should move into a decentralization, give space and give voice to these communities, give somehow the opportunity to engage. These are possibly somehow true complementary, but also conflicting forcing, complementary mechanism. Where should we stand? Where should we somehow start thinking about designing a platform that address these societal issues and integrate these two aspects, these two mechanisms? Anil.
Shall I start, Julia? I didn't know if you were calling on us or if we should be volunteering. So now that we know we're volunteering, I will volunteer first.
Thank you for volunteering.
You're quite welcome. So I think that, with respect to what I'm thinking about and kind of the ecosystem of social media platforms and information flows and false information, my research, the research that we work, that I presented today, suggests that some kind of monitoring effort would increase the costs for the bad guys. And the perspective we took in the paper is of a platform. But the natural extension is if I'm let's say I'm a news provider and I want to transact on Twitter and Facebook and TikTok, if I have to manage all three of their monitoring activities, that's triple my costs. And so there's just a natural evolution of thinking that if there's an external monitor that Twitter and Facebook and TikTok all buy into, they can adopt the recommendations of that monitor how they see fit. But the monitor is external to any one of those platforms. There is some value in centralization. Now, let me kind of play both sides of the coin here. It seems to me that how that monitoring takes place is an open discussion. Maybe it's a machine learning model like what I presented. Maybe it is crowdsourced, right? So there are organizations out there where if you receive a phishing domain, you can post it to this community platform of existing phishing domains, and they keep that data set public. And so that's kind of like a monitoring of phishing activities. I can imagine something similar with respect to false information, where it's not just the central monitor telling you what's what, it's a two-way street between individuals, the monitor, and the social media platforms themselves.
Thank you, Anil. I think that connects quite nicely to Charlie's last presentation, and what I found fascinating and connected to what just said is the role of these third-party verifier. Can they actually help in decreasing the cost? Because it's actually even a point that Gurnita mentioned, like in these three-dimensional graph, cost actually matter. To what extent can we introduce these parties?
Well, I think, again, channeling my inner finance professor, when you have property rights at stake, somebody has to certify the property rights. Now, I think, Gurnita's working with Aja, but on a different project, there are these things called smart contracts that could be potentially used to vet the protocols that stand behind these requests, applications for carbon offsets. So but you do need someone who is not or you do need an agency that is not an interested party if property is going to change hands to certify the existence of property rights and certify the transfer of property rights. And but I think there is a feeling in many societal platforms that property rights are the enemy, and or the system that endows people with property rights is a bad system, and therefore, you know, one shouldn't be supporting it in any way, shape, or form. So that I think is the fundamental question: is to what extent do people want to allow financial market mechanisms into this space?
You are somehow raising a quite spicy issue.
Spicy issue, yes.
I sense that
you know.
I sense that Gurnita wanted to share something, and then there is Dror and Shaz.
Yeah, so I think I inadvertently shared my slide while Carlos was speaking, so my apologies for that. But I was kind of thinking about, you know, how to respond to the question, and you know, one of the you know ways in which we could think about this question is along the three dimensions. So this is borrowing from our framework, which we presented in the special issue in SMJ on platform ecosystems, and we you know, we thought about these governance mechanisms for platforms as meta organizations along three strategic dimensions. So one is with respect to platforms as they enter new markets. And so I think there is some work that Raghu and others have done on how that governance interface between incumbents and the new entrants unfolds. And I think these issues need to be, you know, unpacked across these three dimensions, you know, be it the entry of platforms with respect to incumbents, be it, you know, competition between platforms, and, you know, Shaz and his co-authors have done some work here in terms of, you know, looking at Cisco's entry in the, you know, fog computing, you know, space. And lastly, within platform competition. So, you know, when we're thinking about coordinating exchanges and transactions, depending upon which type of strategic interaction we're thinking about, the governance mechanisms would need to be adapted to that particular, you know, context is what I'm trying to, you know, get across through this framework.
Excellent.
Shaz, you are next.
I just wanted to follow up on the question itself, but also how Anil responded. And I think one of the problems of what we call, you know, bad guys or unsavory news is that if you look at all these, and I'm happy to hear other panelists' comments on this, that if you look at all these platforms that we rely on for news, I mean, their information architectures are designed to organize information that channel to users in a way that kind of optimize the advertising revenue to their platforms. We've seen this with Facebook recently, with the scandal breaking out. So the idea is that users, you know, getting users the information that they need to know is nowhere near profitable as feeding them information they want to know, right? So the problem with all this governance, what Anil and others are saying, is that it's still the carrot juice versus Coca-Cola problem, as my co-author puts it, that what's good for users isn't as profitable what is compared to what makes us feel good. So that problem is beyond just a governance problem, is how, so even if you have these so-called bad, first of all, who are the bad guys, who are the good guys, is a matter of your political leanings and which side of the divide of political polarized side are you? So who can be really bad guys versus good guys? And people just want to listen to what people, you like to see what they want to listen to rather than the facts. So I don't know how you would be addressing that through this governance mechanisms that I very much appreciate and agree with, but that problem remains, I think, regardless of what these governance mechanisms.
Thank you, Charles. Yes, Annie, do you want to respond? I remember that was also George who wanted to intervene earlier. Okay, yeah, so then Annie, yes.
Yeah, so Shaz, I completely agree with you, right? That's like a key problem. If it's not in the incentives of the platform, they're not going to implement it. I think that's actually another good reason of externalizing the monitoring effort, because the monitor can publicize, hey, here's our list of problematic domains. And now all of a sudden, there's something that external stakeholders can act on. Whereas all the governance that happens within a platform, we can't see it. We don't know what the firm is doing. They say, oh, we blocked 96% of all false domains. Okay, well, false content. Great, we have to take your word for it. But if this is external monitor, we can see if you actually are blocking those domains. If I can successfully share, now I can exert pressure. And that opens up the channel of not using consumption to exert pressure, but using voice and stakeholder efforts that obviously we have seen in many other situations.
I think what you are.
So just to kind of say one quick thing. So, you know, all of these monitoring and third-party verification and accreditation mechanisms, wouldn't they add to costs? I mean, the whole point of having these platforms and going back to that trifecta is to balance, you know, economic efficiency, cost and quality, right, in terms of the social responsibility or social value creation. And so, you know, we see that a lot with impact investing, for instance, and it's a completely different context. But the reason why they try to, you know, keep things to the absolute basics in terms of monitoring, in terms of you know, the assessments and so on, is because they cannot afford to, you know, let the costs run, you know, kind of beyond what you know, the value, the social or economic value creation outcome. So just kind of, you know, throwing that out as something to consider as we think about adding more layers of you know, accreditation and so on.
There's a very deep theorem in economics that says a signal, to be believable, a signal has to be costly, and that otherwise it's cheap. It's called cheap talk, and if it's not costly, then but I think you're absolutely right, Kunita. Things have to be balanced, and the question is, where does the balance bring you?
Ron, do you want to intervene?
Yeah, I think I could maybe bring in another perspective, a literature that I think is salient in this context is the literature on labeling, environmental labeling, sustainability labeling, right? So that's something that has a lot of research attention for about 2 decades now. You know, the fact that you go to a store and something says that it's, you know, it's sustainable on it. Well, what does that mean? And you know, who governs that? Who makes those decisions? Can we create a label that it would actually be correct and useful for people? And I think if I look at the literature and kind of all the approaches to this, it's actually, you know, I think we've discovered that that's actually an unattainable outcome. You know, so even if you design a perfectly good governance system around a label which has credible information that's vetted by experts, that kind of everybody, it's like, and then, you know, anybody else can just set up another label next to it, and off they go to the races with kind of carrying a different story. And
something that somehow relates to to the relationship with the institution. And so we are talking about a lot of governance, but actually this governance somehow can be influenced also by government, by institutions, and probably it goes to Burnita's presentation first, but somehow you touched on this issue. How should these platforms interact with these institutions? And is there any regulation gap that actually those platforms might leverage at their benefit, or instead somehow they could contribute to fill the gap in a positive way?
So if I may, share my slide again. So this was, the slide where I was talking about the institutional differences with regards to how data is viewed, data privacy and data security is viewed across the US and across the European Union. And I've tried to kind of extract this from some of the studies that legal scholars have been doing. So some, the law review papers that I've looked at. And I think what has come out of this is that there is, in fact, a pretty stark difference. And this also came out of Carlos's presentation about emissions trading regimes that differ across the US and the European Union context. And so on the one hand, these institutional differences create problems, can create costs for companies as they're trying to, especially for the US firms that are more accustomed to this permissionless innovation type context. As they are trying to adapt to GDPR, they're probably going to be incurring far greater costs, and they're more likely to get caught in the crosshairs. But I think there is also an opportunity for institutional arbitrage, right, to kind of take advantage of institutional differences for companies, by platforms, and see how they might be able to actually take advantage of these institutional differences. I don't have a good answer to how they might be able to do that, but I think from the vast literature in a variety of domains like international business and international finance, I think there are examples of how that can be achieved. I'll stop here.
Thank you.
I think there are real differences across between the European perspective and the North American US perspective, and it comes out. I mean, we can't pass a cap and trade law at the federal level. We have them at the state level, but it goes against the grain at the federal level. And Europe has a pretty comprehensive cap and trade system. So, arguably you get what you deserve. You get what your country deserves.
Thank you so much. Any other thought on these, let's say, more macro issue influencing?
I mean, I think it raises this interesting question of this, paradox or trade-off between innovation and, all other types of societal issues like data privacy and others that we've been talking about. So, so I think there is that.
Yeah, one question, one issue with Carlos just raised about, yes, I totally agree. You deserve, you get what you deserve. Carlos, totally agree on that. But one interesting quandary that is that in this in our discussions on this news platform to create a more inclusive news platform, one question that comes up that in certain governments, if you like, or certain places, there's institutional support for distorted news, as long as those news doesn't threaten power structures, so that there's an institutional mechanism to make sure any dissident news or any news that disagrees with the dominant viewpoint is silenced or whatever. And then there's the other issue is the literacy rates could be low and high, which then determines, okay, so the literacy rate could determine the level of credence that you might have to any particular fact or not. But the interesting thing about the US is the quandary that the US doesn't have an institutional system for supporting distorted news. On the other hand, it doesn't even have low literacy rates. And yet over 50% believe in climate change. So that's interesting that the US is not highly illiterate, neither is it there's an institutional mechanism to distort fake news, or rather to promote fake news. Even then, you see these very interesting anomalies, which can't be explained through illiteracy or through institutional structures. I was just wondering if that's beyond just the regulatory side of things.
Thank you, Charles, for this note. And it is unfortunately the time to, I would say, end this discussion, although we would have so many other issues to touch upon. Before passing to Georg for the final wrap-up, let me thank you, Miriam Mariani and Giovanni Valentini from the K&I division for their support in organizing this session. This would have not happened, of course, without their help and their support in setting up these initiatives. So thank you, Miriam. Thank you, Giovanni, a lot. And thank you for being with us online all the time. Georg, now you have the final word.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, I want to join Julia for thanking especially our great panelists. And I think we very nicely saw this pluralism that's out there with respect studying societal platforms, like pluralism in terms of the challenges that are tackled from climate change, fake news, and uneven access to healthcare. Also pluralism in terms of the players that are analyzed shaping these challenges, from cooperation to politics, online communities, academia, but also the very nice range of methods from qualitative and big data and machine learning approaches. So I think that was highly inspiring, especially since it's such a big question and yeah, interesting and important one, how these platforms further develop and yeah, how they shape society, which is a lot of food for thought for further research. So thank you very much for that. Yeah, everyone will watch this video, will have an agenda to explore for the next years, because so many food for thought is in there. So again, thanks for all of you, and look very much forward to continue the conversation in the SMS and at the other events to advance the research on this great and highly important topic. And have a right and best rest of the day, and good night wherever you are. And yeah, hopefully see you soon. Bye bye.
Thank you.